Dark greetings, everybody. Welcome again to HALLOWEEK. Check out the previous episode on the psychology of witches if you haven't already. And in this episode, we're talking about the psychology of ghosts. Oh, and I forgot to say, my name's Anna. I'm a clinical psychology doctorate student, and I make videos about real-life applications to psychology. So if you are into that, hit like and subscribe. So let's dive right in. Why do people believe in ghosts? In a sense, it's very simple. We have a desire to see people we've lost. I was recently talking to my friend about someone who told me that they see the ghost of one of their late relatives. And this friend of mine also lost someone very dear to her in a tragic accident. And she told me the mind sees what it wants to see. I think this is very true. When I first went back home to Romania after my grandpa died, I kind of had this weird moment where I was looking out the car window and I thought, what if I just saw him on the street? How strange and scary would that be? And it was a strange thought. It goes back to that inability for the mind to wrap itself around the idea that death is absolute. It's completely final. When someone dies, there's no coming back from that. And when you break up with someone, or they cut ties with you, or they move to another country, or they graduate from your school and go off somewhere else, there's always that possibility that you will be able to see them again, that your paths will cross again. So when someone dies, we struggle as humans to understand the finality of it. We think, no, surely this is not the end. Surely it's not possible. Surely it's not 100% certain that I will never see this person again, because it's just so, it doesn't make sense to us. We don't know anyone that's died, so how does that make sense? So the mind finds ways around that, either to, first of all, cope with the finality of death, or to, secondly, repeatedly remind you that this is the end and you need to accept that it's the end. Another reason why people might believe in ghosts is the desire to believe that the end doesn't really mean an end and that we can continue to roam the earth. People believe in ghosts because they want to believe that death is not the end for their loved ones, but also they want to believe that death is not the end for them. There's also a reason why people who believe in ghosts are usually also people who believe in the afterlife, because they want to cling to this vision that death isn't the end, it's not just a state of eternal unconsciousness. And they want to believe that even after they die, they will be able to, depending on what their vision of ghosts or spirits are, walk around, talk to their loved ones, see what's happening with the living, continue to have an influence over the way things happen, have a consciousness, and so on. All these things that living people have. By this logic, there's not a whole lot of difference between life and death. There's not a whole lot of difference between ghosts and living people. Like, for example, I've talked about this before, but I'm from Romania. We have ancient Dacians, those are our ancestors. And the ancient Dacians used to believe that death was not final, absolute. It was just a change in nationality. I think that was such a beautiful way of describing it. And there are people who think hell is their worst fear, and there are also people who think not existing is their worst fear. And I think it's interesting that for a lot of people, the idea of not existing is even scarier than the idea of burning in hell. And that's why I think people like the idea that you can actually come back after you die, that you can come back in the form of a spirit or a ghost. Then, of course, another reason why people believe in ghosts is religion, the idea of souls or spirits and the influence of culture. Whenever a client discloses to me that they see ghosts, I have to first and foremost look at how normal this is given their culture and their religion. If this is someone whose religion promotes a belief in the spirit as separate from the body in its flesh form, if their family told them ghost stories growing up and encouraged a belief in ghosts, if their culture has rituals and legends that promote a belief in ghosts, like for example, Mexican cultures that believe the spirits of the dead family members are there to protect them against their other more evil spirits, then I'm probably not going to assume that this is a case of psychosis. This is probably a very normative belief given their upbringing and their experiences. But alternatively, it could be a sign of mental illness. It could be a sign of psychosis or hallucinations. So it's completely different if someone is exhibiting strange behavior or has an increase in acute symptomatology. If they hear voices telling them to do things or telling them abusive things, or they have other signs of schizophrenia or depression or bipolar disorder, if they cannot function because of these visions, if they were not raised in a culture or religion that promoted belief in ghosts, that's a little bit more concerning than someone that was raised that way. And hallucinations tend to happen randomly, not usually just at night when you have been told by scary movies and stories that this is when the supernatural tends to occur. Also, it's very tricky because sometimes people have hypnagogic hallucinations as well. So it could be also that as they're falling asleep, maybe they even have sleep paralysis, or they're just in this limbo state between awake and asleep, and that's why they have these scary hallucinations, which culture has told them are ghosts. But I have a professor who actually thinks that it's not that we're in this dream state, it's that when we're half asleep, it's actually that our guard is down, that we can actually see the world the way that it really is. And I think that was a fascinating and very scary thought. But again, it's very tricky to differentiate between culturally normative beliefs and psychosis at times, and it takes an open mind and a lot of consultation. So now let's talk about, why do some people not believe in ghosts? Because a lot of people don't. For some people, it just doesn't make sense logistically. It doesn't make sense if you don't believe in souls or spirits. If you believe that a person's soul is essentially just their personality and values, which cannot exist without the activation of their brain, then it becomes virtually impossible to believe in ghosts. It also doesn't make sense if your view of what happens after death doesn't explain the function of a ghost. Like, for example, if you believe that there's either heaven or hell, why would there also be dead people roaming the earth? Although some people might view that as purgatory, so some people can logistically explain that. Or if you believe what happens after you die is absolute nothingness, then why would you believe that some of us stick around? You know, for some people, depending on their beliefs and their worldviews, it just doesn't logistically add up. Other logistical questions that don't make sense to people: how does it get decided who gets turned into a ghost and who doesn't? Does a ghost disappear after it gets what it wants, or does it stick around forever? What happens if so many ghosts accumulate over the years in a home that they have nowhere to go and they're just kind of knocking into each other? What happens if the place where a ghost lives is demolished? Can ghosts move around? Are they omniscient, or do they not even know that they're dead? Why would they stick around if there's not so much they can do to affect the lives of the people they stuck for? There are just too many unanswered questions and too many loopholes for some people to believe in ghosts. Another reason why people might not believe in ghosts is the tendency to look to logical and physical explanations before turning towards the spiritual. So, for example, my neighbor believes in ghosts, and she always tells me that when my cat meows at the ceiling, it's because she sees ghosts. Even after I try to tell her that my cat meows when she sees orbs reflecting off of screens, and that we can see these orbs, and that they happen in the morning because that's when the light is reflecting from the window. But yet, even after I explain all this, her go-to is still, she's probably seeing ghosts. So I was recently talking to someone who was telling me that he saw a ghost as a child. And as he was telling me why he thought that was the case, and he was telling the story, I asked, oh, but did you think about, I don't remember what it was exactly, this potential explanation for what you perceived? And he immediately shut it down with, I know what I saw, no one else can convince me otherwise. And of course, your reality is your reality. It is your experience. I'm not invalidating that. But here's a hard truth. Our minds are fallible. While our subjective realities are valid in that we make our own meaning and we interpret things through our own lens, that doesn't mean that we should always take our perception at its word. For example, if I take a glance at the lake and it looks orange to me, I'm not just going to assume that the lake is orange. I'm going to do a double take. I'm going to take off my sunglasses. I'm going to ask the people around me, does the lake look orange to you? I'm going to Google possible reasons why it looks orange, or like maybe it's smog or something. And I'll even consider the possibility that for some reason my eyes are showing me a distortion right now. I'm not simply going to assume that the lake is orange and no one can convince me otherwise. Let me give another more realistic example of how the mind is fallible. When I was a little girl, I went through a phase in which I was super into witches and I really wanted to see one. It was like all that I drew was just witches on brooms. And one morning around dawn, I remember being half asleep and seeing what I thought was a witch's hat walking past my window. And I believed it 100% at the time and for years after that, because I was a child and I was preoccupied with seeing witches. But now I can think of multiple reasons why my mind was wrong. I was probably in a hypnopompic state where the mind is waking up and it's, renowned for having a lot of hallucinations around that time. I could have misattributed my uncle walking by to go to work. I could have seen a bird or, something else that I saw semi-asleep, and I kind of perceived what I wanted to perceive. My point is not to try to convince you to, question your reality or question your belief in ghosts if that's what you believe in. My point is that some people have a philosophy more like I did when I was a child, where there's no second guessing their perception or in any examination of alternatives before coming to a conclusion. And some people think more like I do now, looking for alternatives and possible explanations before assuming that an unlikely possibility is 100% for sure reality. So now let's talk a little bit about why we're so afraid of ghosts. The first thing is fear of the unknown. We want to know what happens after death, and we fear what happens after death, so we create these stories. Because having a theory or a belief about what happens is more comforting. It's more comforting than not knowing anything. It's more comforting than accepting that we simply don't know what happens, because that implies that things could be as terrifying as possible for all we know. Another reason people are so scared of ghosts is because they're already dead, so we can't defend ourselves against them. They simply do not abide by the same laws of physics. There are different ghost narratives based on different rules about what ghosts can and cannot do. Like, some are see-through, some are solid form, some can't touch solid matter, some can touch you, some know that they're dead, some don't. Some follow you if you move, while others are forced to stay in the same house. All these different laws of physics, laws of ghosts. The only consistency in these stories is the amount of inconsistency that there is. And we don't know how ghosts work, so we don't know how to protect ourselves against them or get rid of them either. Do we hit them with a skillet? Do we politely ask them to leave? Do we yell at them to go away? Do we throw holy water on them? Do we move houses? We simply do not know, and that terrifies people. Another reason why we fear ghosts is kind of because it excites us. We want that thrill of adventure, that thrill of fear. This is the reason people go to haunted houses too. This is the reason I went to a haunted corn maze. I had an awesome time getting scared. I was welcoming getting scared for some reason. And it's interesting because oftentimes those of us who are the most anxious, the most fearful, are also those of us most in love with the idea of fear. Like for me, I'm an anxious person. I can't sleep for months or years after I hear a really scary ghost story. Like, I once never slept with my hand on my pillow from the age of 10 to 22 because of a ghost story I read when I was 10. And yet I am constantly excited for fall, for Halloween, for asking people to watch scary movies, for throwing myself into the fear. Why is that? Is it because deep down, maybe unconsciously, we want to confront our fears? And we want to be thrilled? It's just like the fear of, going through a partner's phone, where you're getting a rush from the possibility that you're going to find something terrifying. And it's perfectly summed up by one of my favorite characters from The Office, Robert California, where he says, "Fear plays an interesting role in our lives. How dare we let it motivate us? How dare we let it into our decision-making, into our livelihoods, into our relationships?" It's funny, isn't it? We take a day a year to dress up in costume and celebrate fear. Yeah, we love to be scared, honestly. And that's part of the reason why I'm making this series, is because I love this topic. I love spooky things. I think it's awesome because we can truly think about things that are very existential, that are very deep, and also the psychology behind them, and also just kind of get a thrill out of it. So this was the psychology of ghosts. Let me know, as always, if you have any other theories about anything that I mentioned. I want to know if you believe in ghosts or not. Absolutely, comment down below, and I'll see you in a couple days with the psychology of vampires.